Private First Class Marcus Okafor, had been in the army for 14 months, and in that time he had learned exactly one rule that mattered above all the others. When a senior officer is angry in front of a formation, you keep your eyes forward and your mouth shut. He kept his eyes forward. It was nearly impossible to keep his mouth shut. The morning had started like every other morning, formation at 0600, the same parade ground, the same flags, the same cold concrete smell that never quite left the air, even in summer. Major Daniel Cole had been at the battalion 3 weeks, and in those 3 weeks he had made it abundantly clear, in the careful, deliberate way some officers do, that he intended to tighten things up. He used that phrase often. Okafor had heard it twice already this week alone, usually right before someone got reamed out for something that, a month ago, nobody would have blinked at. Captain Frost. Major Cole's voice carried across the parade ground without a microphone, the kind of voice that had clearly practiced carrying across parade grounds. Step forward. 3 ranks ahead of Okafor, Captain Elena Frost stepped out of formation and came to attention in front of 400 soldiers, the morning sun throwing her shadow long across the asphalt. She didn't look surprised. She didn't look anything, really, just present, the way she always was, the way Okafor had come to recognize over the past several months as simply how Captain Frost looked. Steady, unremarkable in the specific way that some people cultivate on purpose, the way a person looks when they've decided, a long time ago, not to take up more space than necessary. I've been reviewing the logistics files for this battalion since my arrival 3 weeks ago, Major Cole said, holding up a folder for the entire formation to see, though nobody beyond the front rank could have read a word on it. And I've found something troubling. A fuel allocation, dated 4 years ago for nearly 12,000 gallons, diverted, according to this report, to a destination that does not exist on any current base manifest, unaccounted for, unexplained. He let that sit for a moment, the way men do when they've rehearsed a pause. Captain, can you explain this discrepancy to the formation? No, sir, Frost said. Not here. That's what I thought. Cole's voice hardened. 12,000 gallons of fuel, Captain. Either this is gross incompetence, or it's something worse. And either way, I don't see how someone responsible for a discrepancy this size retains the confidence of this command. I'm going to give you the opportunity to spare everyone a formal proceeding. Tender your resignation, effective immediately, and we can handle the rest administratively. He held out his hand. Your ID, Captain. Okafor felt his stomach drop somewhere around his boots. He'd known Captain Frost for 8 months. Not well, not the way you know a friend, but the way a private knows an officer who's quietly, consistently decent in 100 small ways nobody else notices. The kind of officer who learned everyone's name in the first week and used it correctly for the rest of the time you served together. The kind who showed up to the motor pool at odd hours, not to inspect, just to be present, the way some people are simply present in places where things might go wrong. She'd caught him outside the motor pool office one night, back when he was 3 write-ups deep and 1 bad week from washing out entirely, sitting on the curb after hours, not doing anything in particular, just sitting there because he couldn't make himself go back to the barracks yet. Instead of writing him up a 4th time, or walking past the way most officers would have, she'd sat down on the curb next to him and asked him, without any preamble at all, what was actually going on. Nobody had asked him that in months. Not like that, not in a way that made clear the person asking had time for the actual answer, whatever it turned out to be. He'd told her about the letters from home, about the debt he'd enlisted partly to escape, and had somehow made worse, about feeling like he'd made a mistake signing up at all, like the army had taken a chance on him, and was already regretting it. She'd listened to the whole thing without interrupting, and then she'd connected him with a financial counselor on base the next morning, and told him, flatly, in the same even tone she used for everything, that the army made plenty of mistakes, but he wasn't one of them. He'd stayed, he'd made it through. He hadn't told anyone that story, because it felt like hers as much as his. Something private, something that belonged to a curb outside a motor pool at 10 at night, not to the daylight world of formations and write-ups. And now he was watching her get told, in front of 400 people, to hand over her ID like a shoplifter caught on camera. Frost reached into her jacket and produced her ID card. She held it out toward Major Cole, and then, very deliberately, did not let go of it quite yet. Sir, she said, her voice calm, carrying without effort, the way Cole's had carried with great effort. Before I hand this over, I'd like to read one line into the record, for whoever's keeping it. The allocation in question, 12,000 gallons, 4 years ago. Destination redacted on the current manifest. Authorization code Whiskey Tango 907 Foxtrot 2. She said it once, evenly, the way you'd read out a phone number. And in the reviewing stand, 50 feet away, Vice Admiral Patricia Reyes, visiting the base that week for an unrelated logistics inspection, seated in the third row, present mostly out of courtesy, and not expecting to be involved in anything at all, went very, very still. Admiral Reyes had heard that authorization code exactly once before, 4 years ago, in a briefing room, with the lights dimmed and the doors locked, as part of a classified resupply operation supporting a special operations element, operating in terrain that didn't appear on any map a regular formation would ever see. The operation had been small, denayable, and almost entirely unrecorded, which was precisely the point. 12,000 gallons of fuel had gone somewhere that, on paper, didn't exist, because the mission it supported hadn't existed either. Not officially, not for years, and possibly not ever, depending on who you asked and what they were cleared to say. Reyes had been in that briefing room. She remembered the code because she'd been the one who'd signed off on the operation's overall authorization, sitting at the head of a table with 6 other people whose names she could no longer entirely recall. But she remembered, distinctly, that the field logistics officer who'd actually executed the allocation, who'd moved 12,000 gallons of fuel through 3 checkpoints without leaving a trail that could compromise the operation, had been a young captain whose name she'd never had reason to remember until just now, watching her stand at attention on a parade ground, about to hand over her ID to a man who clearly hadn't read past the cover page of whatever file he was holding. It had been, Reyes recalled now, one of the cleaner pieces of logistics work she'd seen in that entire campaign. Quiet, exact, no loose ends. Executed by someone who clearly understood that the safest operation was the one nobody ever had reason to ask about. She'd made a mental note, at the time, to find out who'd run it. She never had. 4 years and 100 other operations had gotten in the way they always did. Admiral Reyes stood up. She didn't wait for protocol, didn't wait for an aide, didn't wait for anything. She stepped down from the reviewing stand, walked across the open ground toward Captain Frost, and, before Major Cole could say another word, came to attention and saluted her. For a moment, nobody on the parade ground moved. 400 soldiers, a major mid-sentence with his hand still extended for an ID card, and an admiral standing at salute in front of a captain. The wrongness and the rightness of it arriving at the same instant, the kind of moment that takes a beat to fully land even on the people closest to it. Then the formation's senior NCO, standing at the front, saluted too, and then the row behind him. And then it moved through the formation the way a held breath moves through a crowd. Not an order. Nobody called it. It simply happened. 400 soldiers coming to attention and saluting an officer that 30 seconds ago they'd watched get accused of theft in front of all of them. Okafor saluted along with everyone else and found, to his own surprise, that his eyes had gone wet. Major Cole, Admiral Reyes's voice, when she finally spoke, was quiet. Quieter than Cole's had been, and infinitely more dangerous for it. That code Captain Frost just read into the record is one I am personally cleared to verify, and I just did. It corresponds to an operation I authorized 4 years ago, in support of a classified element whose existence and whose resupply depended entirely on that allocation never appearing on a standard manifest. Captain Frost executed that allocation, personally, under conditions that I will not describe in this setting, but that I can describe, in full, to anyone with the clearance to hear it. She turned to face Cole directly. Did you read the classified annex attached to that fuel report, Major? The one cross-referenced in the file index? Cole looked, for the first time, like a man recalculating very quickly. Sir, the annex required a clearance review that hadn't been. Then you accused an officer of theft, Reyes said, based on half a file, in front of her entire battalion, without verifying the other half existed. She held out her hand, not for Frost's ID, but toward Cole. Give it back to her. Cole handed over the ID. His hand wasn't quite steady. Captain Frost, Reyes said, turning back, and something in her voice softened. Not much, but enough that Okafor, 3 ranks back, could hear it even from where he stood. I read your transfer request 4 years ago. Medical retirement from forward operations. Request for a logistics assignment. No further public record. I assumed, frankly, that you'd wanted to disappear. I didn't think to ask why, and I'm sorry for that. It seems like maybe you earned a little more recognition than a desk and a quiet posting, even if, evidently, you never asked for it. I didn't want it, ma'am, Frost said simply. I wanted the work to matter. It did. That was enough. It clearly still does, Reyes said, glancing, deliberately, Okafor thought, toward the formation, toward 400 soldiers who had just spent the last 90 seconds learning something about the quiet captain in the logistics office that none of them had known an hour ago. That evening, Okafor found Captain Frost in the same hallway outside the motor pool office, where she'd once found him, except this time it was her dropped ID case. On the floor, contents scattered where it had slipped from her hand, sometime during the walk back from the formation, and Okafor was the one who knelt down to help gather it up. You don't have to do that, Private, Frost said, but she didn't stop him either. I know, ma'am. He handed her the case, then hesitated the way he had 8 months ago outside this same office, except this time it wasn't dread keeping him quiet. It was just not knowing how to say what he wanted to say. Ma'am, what you told me, about not being a mistake. I think about that more than you probably realize. Frost looked at him for a moment. You stayed, she said. That's not nothing, Private. Most people who hear something like that and need to hear it, they hear it once, and it doesn't take. You let it take. She tucked the ID case back into her jacket. For what it's worth, what happened today wasn't about me being some kind of secret hero. I did a job, a long time ago, and it mattered. And then I came back and did a different job, and that mattered too. The only difference today is that somebody finally had the context to see both of those things were the same person. She glanced toward the parade ground, empty now in the evening light, the formation long since dismissed. Major Cole's getting reassigned. By the way, Admiral Reyes pulled him off the reorganization an hour ago. Not punitive. Exactly. Just a recognition that maybe a man who skips the annexes shouldn't be the one deciding who gets to stay. Good, Okafor said, with more feeling than he'd meant to show, and then, quieter. For what it's worth, ma'am, when the Admiral saluted you, before anybody else moved, I think that was the first time I really understood what earned means. Not given. Earned. Frost almost smiled, the closest Okafor had ever seen her come to it. That's a good thing to understand, Private, she said. Took me longer than I'd like to admit. She nodded toward the barracks, the evening settling gold and quiet over the base. Go get some dinner. And Okafor, thank you for staying. Both times today. Okafor walked back toward the barracks in the last of the daylight and found that for the first time in 14 months, he didn't feel like someone the army had taken a chance on. He felt like someone who'd been paying attention the whole time and had finally watched the rest of the world catch up.